Hello everyone, welcome to another video. In this one we're taking a look at the curved swords in Dark Souls 2. Now for this weapon class I would say that there are a couple of weapons that are significantly better than the others, but you'll see what I mean when we make our way through this class of weapons. Anyways, let's get right into it. The first weapon we'll take a look at is the Melu Scimitar. You get this from Gilligan after he moves to Majula. You can also kill him for it and talk to Melintia. Now though this weapon looks really good, it is probably the worst scimitar in the whole class. This weapon's stats are all below average, except for maybe the durability. So it weighs 4 units, has 75 durability, 15 poise break, 100 counter damage, and a 50 strength and 50 dex. It does 369 damage. This thing has very bad scaling with a D and a C scaling in strength and dex, and it takes 12 strength and 9 dexterity. So yeah, unfortunately the Melu Scimitar has nothing good with it, except for maybe that it looks quite nice. Next I have the Elium Lois. This weapon heals you, as well as your allies. If you do the strong attack on an enemy, you will do damage to him and it will heal you as well. It does have 90 durability because this special attack takes about 10 durability. However, the healing is not that much. In Dark Souls 2, life gems are practically infinite, and when it comes to your ally, you could drop them life gems as well or other consumables. The problem with this weapon is that you have to either kill Alana to get it or go through a very long quest to get her to give it to you. It upgrades with petrified dragon bones, and although it does bleed damage, it doesn't do more bleed damage than the falchion, which is a basic weapon that you can get in the beginning of the game. It also weighs more than the falchion, and its base damage without the bleed is lower. At 50 strength and dex, this thing was only doing 366 damage. Overall, I think this weapon has way too many cons. The healing aspect does not make up for it in my opinion. So, the Spider Fang. You get this from the Soul of the Duke's Dear Freya. And this is another weapon that has a special attack when you do the strong attack. Now unfortunately this thing only has 40 durability and it upgrades with dragon bones. Its damage is quite low at 349, and aside from that special attack, it doesn't have anything that makes you want to use this thing over anything else. Now the special attack shoots out a web that has the potential to over-encumber players. However, this doesn't work too well in PvE since the enemies have effectively infinite stamina. So yeah, I don't like, these first weapons are quite bad in my opinion. But yeah, that's all for this one. Let's go to the next. Next up is the Red Rust Sword. This is one of Engarl's weapons. It upgrades with Twinkling Titanite. It weighs 6 units, has 60 durability, 25 poise break, 100 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex, it was doing 417 damage. I can't help but compare a lot of these weapons to the falchion. And this one, you know, upgrading with Twinkling Titanite as well as having that extra weight just doesn't make it worth it for me. Now granted, the 25 poise break is pretty good, but there's another weapon on this list that has also 25 poise break and weighs significantly less and does significantly more damage. So yeah, that's all for this one. Let's go to the next. The Monastery Scimitar. This weapon is an absolute pain to get. It is dropped by one of the phantoms inside of the paintings in Aldia's Keep. It is very light. It weighs 1.5 units, 40 durability, 15 poise, 110 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex, it does 371 damage. However, this thing has very short reach, and essentially there is no real reason to use this over some of the other ones. The Scimitar, which we have yet to see, has practically identical stats to this weapon, except it has more poise but slightly less damage. This thing gets an S scaling in dexterity, so unless you have really high dex, it's not going to be doing a lot of damage. Now it does have a little bit of a special attack when you one-handed and you do the strong attack. That looks pretty cool. But aside from that, there's not a lot of reason to use this thing. I personally would just use the normal Scimitar for the reach. And it's a lot easier to obtain as well. So the Show Tell, you find this in an iron chest in the Black Gulch. This thing is very curved. This weapon has shield piercing strong attacks. That's the unique factor of it. It upgrades with normal Titanite, weighs 2.5 units, 45 durability, 15 poise, 110 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex, it's doing 366 damage. Well yeah, aside from the shield piercing strong attacks, there's not a lot that will make you use this thing either over some of the other ones. But there are some other weapons in other weapon classes that have that shield piercing strong attack, and they happen to be a little bit better in my opinion. Like say the Mailbreaker or the S-Stock. So yeah, here we go, the Scimitar. From this point on is when I would start considering using some of these curved swords. So the Scimitar weighs 1.5 unit, which is very light. Has 40 durability, 20 poise break, 110 counter damage, and it does 363 damage with a Ring of Blades and 50-50 strength and dex. You can get this from the Varangians that wield it in No Man's Worth, as well as when you're taking an elevator after defeating the Flexal Sentry. If you take that elevator back down and jump on the roof of the elevator, you will also be able to get this weapon guaranteed. It's quite a basic curved sword. It doesn't have any bells and whistles to it. However, this thing doesn't necessarily have any drawbacks to using it either, like some of the other ones do. It does very decent damage for its weight, and it doesn't have extremely short reach or upgrade with some sort of rare material. However, I couldn't put it any higher because the next 3 weapons just do more than this one. Starting with the falchion. You can get this from Blacksmith Lenigrast. It weighs a little bit more at 2.5 units, has 45 durability, 20 poise, 110 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex it does 383 damage. So the majority of the stats are essentially higher than the scimitar. However, this thing does a little bit of bleed damage as a bonus. It is not that much. Most likely it will prompt when you're fighting bosses from time to time, but it's kind of like they took the scimitar, gave it a little bit better stats as well as bleed. And because this thing upgrades with regular Titanite and you can get it relatively early in the game, it makes it really accessible to use. So kind of in the same way that the falchion is an upgrade to the scimitar, the mannequin saber is an upgrade to the falchion. This thing weighs 2.5 units, has 45 durability, 15 poise, which is less than the falchion, 110 counter damage, but it does more bleed, and it has a little bit higher damage as well at 388. Now this weapon is dropped by the mannequins that use it, which are not too many. But a decent way to bleed is to put 2 of these and power stance them and hit enemies that way. Now this thing is just a direct upgrade, other than the fact that it has a little bit less poise break. When you switch between these 2 weapons in your inventory, you'll see that it just simply does more damage as well as more bleed damage. It comes with a little bit higher stats to use, but you can also get it a little bit later in the game. Now I have 50 strength and dex, and the mannequin saber is only doing a little bit more damage than the falchion, though the falchion has a better scaling than the mannequin saber, so maybe at even higher dexterity scaling, the falchion would surpass its damage. That, however, will not be by very much. So yeah, this thing is actually pretty good. I was kind of surprised when I actually got it my first time, because it is quite rare to get, so I'd played many playthroughs without obtaining this weapon. Here we go, at number 1, this is no question, is the warped sword. This thing just takes pretty much all of the best stats from the weapons that we've seen thus far, and just puts it all into one weapon. It weighs 3.5 units, 50 durability, 25 poise break, 130 counter damage, and at 50 strength and dex it does 389 damage. The reason this thing is so good though is because it has one of the higher base damages, above average. It also has 25 poise break, above average, and it also has 130 counter damage, which is above average as well. Now this thing is an absolute monster in PvP, because all of these warp swords have an attack that is incredibly difficult to dodge, that being the running attack, and you can quickly follow it up with many spammed R1s. You get this from the soul of the Flexile Sentry, and it is hands down the best weapon to get from that boss. It gets an A scaling in dexterity and takes 25 dexterity to use. That, I would say, along with the fact that it upgrades with Petrified Dragon Bones, is probably the drawback of this weapon. However, it's kind of like the Chaos Blade, where the stats to use may be a little bit high, the upgrade material may be a little bit rare. But if you manage to get all of those things, you will simply have the best weapon, not just in its class, but maybe top 5 in the whole game. This thing in PvP absolutely destroys. If you've never fought anybody using it, it is relentless, because the running attack is very, very difficult to roll away from as well as dodge. All of these warp swords consume very little stamina, so even if somebody has a shield and tries to block a lot, you yourself don't really consume a lot of stamina as you're trying to break through the shield. These weapons can be buffed and infused as well to do chip damage through shields. But yeah, this thing is just insane. It just does too much damage for how fast it is and how fast you can use it. Now, when you power stance this weapon with a couple of other classes, it works with rapiers, longswords, curved swords, and a few others. You get a pretty cool attack that does a double hit. So yeah, this thing is just incredible. It is probably levels of rapier or katana levels of OP. You may have to watch out in fights against multiple enemies, but that is the weakness of all of these weapons technically. However, this thing has one of the higher poise breaks, which means that you can use it fairly well with a shield as well when you're fighting multiple enemies and still be able to poise break them. I would say that there's still a use for something like the falchion. I think the falchion is a very solid sword because you get it very early and it will get the job done until you get the stats to use this weapon, or if you happen to get lucky enough and get the mannequin saber. But yeah, this thing cannot be overlooked. It is so strong. That was all though for this class of weapons. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.